Good evening, I'm Mike Wise. We got a slight hint at what Ontario's plan to reopen looks like today. There are no timelines, no guarantees of which restrictions will be lifted first. Instead, the Premier made it clear it all depends on a consistent drop in the number of new COVID-19 cases. And Ford warned some activities won't be coming back anytime soon. Lisa Shing now with the details.
The virus travels at its own speed.
As Premier Doug Ford initially promised, reopening the province will be a measured process. That's why we're not seeing a timeline nor many specifics today.
The framework is about how we're reopening, not when.
That framework is laid out in 3 stages. Each will be evaluated by health officials for 2 to 4 weeks. First, select workplaces could open, along with some outdoor spaces like parks. Hospitals could also start to perform elective surgeries, prioritizing cancer patients.
We know that there is a big backlog of those cases outstanding.
The second stage will see more workplaces opening, like in the retail and service industry. The final stage will see all businesses opened and even larger gatherings. But don't count on going to a concert or taking in any sports for the foreseeable future.
Until we get a vaccine for this virus, and it's a little ways off, I don't think it's going to be 100% normal.
Health officials will decide when the province is ready for each stage. It'll depend on whether we see a decrease in cases, the availability of ventilators and personal protective equipment. And health officials have to be tracing 90% of new case contacts in one day and increasing testing. So how close could we be to seeing playgrounds and some businesses reopened?
So we have a ways to go before we get to start our first 2-week period.
Last week, Ontario's top doctors said they'd like to see fewer than 200 new daily cases before relaxing measures. The province has consistently been above 400 new cases a day since the beginning of the month. Lisa Shing, CBC News, Toronto.
Ontario reached another grim milestone this evening. According to numbers compiled by CBC, there's now been more than 1,000 deaths due to COVID-19. But as Lisa just mentioned, the number the province is focusing on is new cases daily. Now, this chart here shows how through most of April, that rate increased. Now, it is showing some signs of perhaps peaking, even going down lately, but that's not enough to show a trend. The province says we'd need a consistent decrease over 2 to 4 weeks to move to phase 1. As Kelda Yun found out, many businesses say that extra month will be tough.
It's been over 6 weeks since Oyster Boy shut its doors.
We're going to take it day by day.
That was owner Adam Cahoon then. Flash forward to now.
Every day is a new day, and you're like, all right, we made it through one more day.
He's trying to stay optimistic and has been taking advantage of the government programs. While it's been tough, he says he trusts the government's phased approach.
They seem to be doing a great job in the government of Ontario, listening to the doctors.
Rocco Rossi from the Ontario Chamber of Commerce also thinks it's the right approach.
The safe way, the slow way is the right way.
He says it's just as important to continue increasing capacity to test, track, and trace.
As we're opening up, if there are flare-ups, they can be contained very quickly.
But some think Ontario is not moving quickly enough.
But the time to start reopening is now.
Dr. Eric Hoskins was Ontario's health minister under the previous government.
What was the reason why we told people to stay at home while we're all self-isolating? And the reason was because we wanted to avoid overwhelming our healthcare system.
He says since there wasn't a surge and hospitals are coping very well, we should start opening up carefully.
Businesses where their work is outdoors, and we can start to reopen our parks.
Dan Kelly from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business says 40% of business owners tell them they may not be able to survive if the current restrictions stay in place until the end of May.
But we do think some of the rules could be relaxed a little bit. Many small businesses are pointing out that you can still go buy a t-shirt or a frying pan at Costco or Walmart, and yet their little 1,000-square-foot business is required to be 100% shut down.
Cahoon says he plans to start offering curbside oyster pickup on May 10th.
It's all about striving to survive, and when we do, then we'll thrive, right? So the next 2 years are going to be really tough.
Kelda Yoon, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, Mayor Tory is calling the province's reopening framework a safe and responsible approach, adding it will guide Toronto's reopening plans.
We've undertaken to work closely with the Government of Ontario, as the success in getting Ontario back on its feet will be directly related to the success we have in getting its largest city and its economic engine back on its feet.
Tory says there will be extensive collaboration between the city and the province. He says Toronto is working on its own reopening plan, and we'll have more details on that in the near future. He also announced the Curb TO program today. Now, it is a plan to close some curb lanes to vehicles, allowing that road space to be used instead by pedestrians. The idea is to alleviate the crowding on sidewalks outside of businesses such as grocery stores, pharmacies, and restaurants that are allowing pickup. Toronto's largest theaters will be dark for the rest of the year. Mirvish confirming today it won't start its new season until January 2021. The company says the safety of its audience members, actors, and staff are the most important, and so it says it is postponing all of its performance runs. However, if the province deems it safe for the shows to go on earlier the next year, Mirvish says its hit show, Come From Away, will come back to the Royal Alex. And the Stratford Festival is also canceling its season for the rest of the year. The organization says if it's deemed safe enough, it will work on putting together some sort of show in the fall or near the holidays. If you have purchased a ticket for this season, the festival says it will be contacting you about how to move forward. And Porter Airlines is extending its temporary suspension of all flights by 4 more weeks. That'll take it until the end of June. Like many airlines, Porter was hit hard by the dramatic reduction of air travel because of COVID-19. In addition to grounding all of its flights back on March 21st, the airline issued temporary layoff notices to most of its 1,500 staff members, though it says it's been able to rehire some of them thanks to the government wage subsidy program. Well, we are hearing tonight from 2 retired nurses who say they answered the government's call for help when it asked retired nurses to consider going back to work. But they say more than a month later, they're still waiting to start. Farah Morale has their story.
We need more nurses.
It's a call that's been repeated by provincial health officials since the pandemic began.
The nurses, by all means, they contact us. They'll be in a home immediately. We need all hands on deck right now.
4 weeks had gone by. I didn't receive a phone call or anything.
Julie Richardson is a retired ICU nurse who answered that call. 6 weeks ago, she signed up on the government's online portal to go back to work. It wasn't until 2 weeks ago that she heard anything back.
I felt that the timeline was a little bit long to go and help in the nursing homes when their needs are so dire.
She's not alone. Mary LaChapelle, a retired nurse from Trent Hills, started the process of trying to get back to work in mid-March. She says the government finally got in touch last week.
Working through SARS, and you just know how stretched everybody is, and I haven't been away from it for that long. I just was really surprised that it took that long.
Last week, the province announced the military was being brought in to help with staffing at long-term care homes.
He gave me the shortness of breath.
But the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario says there are hundreds of nurses ready, willing, and able to work. The problem is some facilities haven't been reaching out to them.
There is a disconnect between what we hear from the media on organizations that say we cannot cope, and then actually them approaching us.
We asked the Ministry of Health why nurses like Richardson and LaChapelle are waiting upwards of a month to be deployed when they're calling for more staff now. It sent us a statement which said in part it's holding regular conversations with the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario about how retired nurses can help, but didn't explain the delays. Meanwhile, Richardson says she now has a job secured and is expected to be back on the front lines. She only wishes she could have brought that relief sooner.
The Premier has always been saying all hands on deck. We need staff, and in a way I was just sort of sitting there waiting for the phone to ring, and it took 6 weeks.
Farah Morale, CBC News, Toronto.
Turning to some other news tonight, police are still trying to track down several suspects after a 15-year-old boy was shot and killed last night near Jane and Shepherd. Greg Ross has more on the city's 24th homicide of the year.
Seconds before 15-year-old Jeremiah Ranger was shot, security footage from the townhouse complex he lives in captured Ranger and a friend getting into the back seat of this white SUV.
While inside the car, an interaction took place, and the deceased and the young man in his company fled the SUV.
According to police, Ranger suffered a single gunshot wound to the left hip area as he tried to escape.
Police say Ranger didn't get far after leaving the vehicle. He collapsed just meters away on the other side of this garbage enclosure, and this is where he was found when paramedics arrived. Today, friends and family stopped by to leave flowers in his memory.
Police say Ranger was home just before 6 o'clock Sunday evening when he received a phone call. Moments later, he left his house and walked towards the SUV. Police aren't sure why he got in or why he was shot. They're not sure how many suspects were in the vehicle, although they say there was more than one. And at this point, it's not clear what relationship Ranger had with the suspects.
I don't know the extent of their knowledge of each other. Obviously, they must have had some sort of passing acquaintance to meet up.
The person who was with Ranger is cooperating with police, and they were also able to recover more surveillance video of that white SUV fleeing the scene. They believe it is an Audi.
The SUV left the area and was last seen northbound on Marquet Street to westbound Spen Valley Drive. So anyone in the area between 5:40 p.m. and 5:50 p.m. is urged to check any video they may have.
Today, a GoFundMe campaign was started by the victim's mother, Crystal Ranger, to help pay for funeral costs. On it, she wrote, "My son Jeremiah just turned 15 on April 10th, and now he's gone. I know my son is with God." Greg Ross, CBC News, Toronto.
We're at the front lines of this, and the government seems to have forgotten that.
This weekend, the Ontario government announced it would be giving medical workers a bump in pay as a thank you. But not all frontline workers are feeling the love. Who's on your screen but is not on the list? That's coming up. Plus,
we do have a change in our weather pattern working its way in overnight tonight, so some showers in the forecast for Tuesday. And not only there, I'm meteorologist Colette Kennedy. We've got a few rainy days coming through this week. It's going to impact the temperatures too. I'll have all the details. Those are coming up after the break.
It's time for a check of the forecast with meteorologist Colette Kennedy. And Colette, beautiful start to the week, but things are going to be changing by midweek.
Yeah, we got off to a great start today. Kind of helps with the Monday blues, but you know, things are changing in terms of what we're going to see with precipitation and our temperatures. An impact there as well. So kind of your headlines then. Midweek, the coolest day will be about Wednesday with this next system that's going to move through. It does make for a pretty wet week, and I'll show you in terms of what I'm thinking with the amounts of rainfall altogether. But by the end of the week, I have to give you some good news in here too. We're going to bounce back up. We'll kind of bookend it. So Friday's looking better and a little warmer, but really Saturday. I know that's several days out, but it's really looking good as we just peek towards next weekend. So this is the first system I need to talk to you about. This one, as it comes in overnight tonight, more clouds, and we will see some spotty showers. It looks a little more intense here than I think it will be. So some scattered showers towards tomorrow morning, probably breaking up quite a bit into the afternoon, maybe even with some sunny breaks. We're going to see our temperature coming up to the low teens, but it won't be that bad if we could dry out a little bit. But now this is Wednesday morning, and this will be this next system as it works its way in. It's not just showers, but we'll actually begin to see some periods of rain, especially as we go into Wednesday night, and then lingering into Thursday morning, some heavier rains there too, and then it begins to break up. But even on the backside, there'll be a little bit of instability, so I still have a chance for some showers going into Friday. And just to give you an idea of the amount of rain, now this is putting it all together, so between what we will see tomorrow, which isn't that much, and then Wednesday and Thursday at this point, it's looking like around 30 millimeters. Now, I'll keep tweaking that as we get a little closer towards that system for Wednesday, okay? For overnight in southwestern Ontario, for Chatham-Kent, 8 degrees, Leamington 8, Windsor as well. Some of those showers working their way in or continuing to. And then tomorrow afternoon, you'll get some clearing behind this. And because of that, with a little bit of sunshine, a little bit of luck for a little help from Mother Nature, we should see the temperatures popping up there to about 18 degrees. So actually a really pleasant afternoon for you in the Windsor area. But overnight for the GTA, 5s have it in terms of the overnight lows, some of those showers working their way in, and then hopefully getting a bit of clearing as we're drying out in the afternoon hours. And there you see that range of temperatures from 11 to St. Catharines, 14 degrees. Certainly not a bad afternoon there. But 12 for the city. Wednesday with more significant rain as we go into Thursday. That's where that cooler day is, Wednesday for midweek that I mentioned. And then by Friday, really getting into some nice improvement there. So I'll take you to 15 degrees, I think, at least for Friday. And then very encouraging when we have a look at Saturday and that sunshine. But not only that, upper teens for our afternoon high, Mike.
Looking forward to that. Thanks, Colette.
The weather update is brought to you by Trane, the most reliable heating and cooling brand. We test, so it runs. Take advantage of special offers now. It's hard to stop a Trane.
Mark Eversley is set to become the first Black Canadian general manager in the NBA. Reports say the Chicago Bulls are hiring him for the top job. Eversley grew up in Brampton. He played basketball at Cardinal Leger before going into sports marketing and working in the front office for the Raptors and the Washington Wizards. And Mayor Tory says he's been talking with the Toronto Raptors about the team's plans. While there are no plans to start playing at the Scotiabank Arena anytime soon, the team is interested in reopening its practice facility at Exhibition Place. Tory says that will depend on advice from Toronto Public Health. Well, food delivery service Foodora is closing down operations in Canada next month. This is all amid a fight with its workers attempting to unionize. The company citing strong competition today for the closure. It's effective May 11th. However, the company had also been engaged in a high-profile fight with its delivery drivers and riders who voted on unionization last fall. The shutdown comes as Foodora and other delivery services are experiencing a surge in demand because of COVID-19 lockdowns. Some healthcare workers in the province are frustrated after being left out of the pandemic pay increase. Premier Doug Ford announced the $4 an hour upgrade for frontline workers over the weekend, but some paramedics and respiratory therapists say they should be on the list as well. Kelda Yun has more on that.
They treat more than 4,700 patients in Ontario every day and are often the first ones on scene during an emergency. That's why Dave Wakely says members of the Peel Paramedics Union were flabbergasted when they found out they weren't included in the list of workers getting pandemic pay.
We're at the front lines of this, and the government seems to have forgotten that.
Those who are eligible include nurses, PSWs, security guards, and those in food service, working in places such as long-term care homes, emergency shelters, correctional institutions, and acute hospitals.
We're recognizing their sacrifice.
Ford says more than 350,000 workers will get the top-up, which will last until mid-August. Wakely says it's puzzling why paramedics weren't on the list given the risks they are taking every day.
We go into a house often not knowing what the COVID status is of a patient. We've got members going into long-term care facilities to swab people for COVID-19. And most of our calls end up with us bringing patients to the hospitals.
Paramedics aren't the only ones not included. Also not on the list include respiratory therapists, midwives, and medical lab technicians.
We're feeling left out. We're feeling concerned that we're not being seen.
Kelly Hassel is president of the Respiratory Therapy Society of Ontario.
We're the people that are helping put the airways in or putting the airways in, managing the people while they're on the ventilators, trying to keep them off ventilators.
In a statement, the Ministry of Health said, we're continuing to consult with our healthcare partners to address questions and determine who might meet the criteria for pandemic pay. Both Hassel and Wakely say it's not about the money.
Not being named just makes us very stressed and concerned that perhaps we're not being recognized for the frontline work that we are doing with the rest of our colleagues.
It's about the respect of being seen as a frontline healthcare worker.
Kelda Yoon, CBC News, Toronto.
After the break, we're going to look back at the extraordinary life of Fu Hei Lun. She was born 111 years ago and fought injustice and racism, lived through both world wars, but died due to the coronavirus. Her incredible story coming up next. Before we go, we want to bring you the remarkable story of Foon-Hye Lum, who died last week at 111 years old. Now, in her lifetime, she overcame struggle, war, and injustice. But sadly, it was an outbreak of COVID-19 in a Toronto long-term care home that killed her. Our Natalie Collada has more on her life and how her granddaughter is taking up the torch.
You know, Grandma lived so long and she fought so hard on so many fronts for so many things. So, you know, it kind of makes sense that she would kind of try to lead the charge, even in her last days, lying in her bed, that her voice would still resound to the government through her granddaughter that this is a terrible situation.
Helen Lee's grandmother survived a lot during her 111 years, but on Friday, Foon-Hye Lum died at Toronto's Monsignor home for the aged from complications from COVID-19.
I was like telling her, you gotta drink, you gotta drink. I was so focused on that I actually didn't remember to say I love you. Because I thought she would be getting better.
By all standards, Lum's life was remarkable. Married at 18, her husband moved to Canada, paid the hefty head tax then levied by the Canadian government to discourage Chinese immigration. Because of Canada's 1923 Exclusion Act, Lum and her children couldn't follow. Instead, they bought property in southern China and lived off the land during the Second World War.
She was able to farm that, she was able to live off of that, she was able to share that with others.
Her green thumb eventually followed her to Canada, where both her garden and her activism bloomed.
She would speak out. She would just say, this is injustice. This is racism.
For the following 20 years, Lum lobbied the Canadian government to redress the head tax and Chinese Exclusion Act, eventually witnessing the government's apology in person. Now Helen is taking up her grandmother's mantle, calling for better standards, facilities, and care of Ontario's elderly. It's what she says her grandmother would do.
She'd be marching our flag. She'd be carrying a sign. She'd be saying, this is not right.
Natalie Collada, CBC News, Toronto.
Quite a story. Well, that's our newscast for tonight. Tomorrow on Metro Morning, they're going to be looking at what Toronto is reading. With libraries closed, demands for e-book lending is way up. The manager of the library's collection department will be by to talk about how it is meeting demand and talk about what is proving popular. That's just before the 8 o'clock news on CBC Radio 1. And before we go, this is a look at the CN Tower tonight. Operators were testing out its lighting system, resulting in a pretty colorful show. Have a great night.